What's cooking, folks? Vermillion Phoenix here, and today I'm here to talk to you about parts in the Barricade trap. Now, this is specifically the regular Barricade trap, and this is the first Barricade that you'll start the game with. Everybody by default has this in their default trap loadout, and it's a pretty important trap. It controls enemy pathing and all that good stuff. But as you unlock the parts, you'll notice that if you have, or if you've stumbled upon the Great Wall Barricade, you'll notice that it's effectively the exact same thing, except with a higher cost. Now, there's some differences between the Great Wall Barricade and the regular Barricade that are relatively straightforward. The regular Barricade takes up half the space. That's not really a benefit or a detriment to the trap itself, but it also would take up twice the trap count to cover the same space. So all you need to know there is that the Great Wall Barricade and the regular Barricade do not allow the exact same trap setups. But as we're talking about the parts, Great Walls are, for me, my default way of barricading most areas, so you'll see me use that more often just because it preserves trap count, and trap count is something that's sort of sacred due to the way that Orcs Must Die Unchained works out. There's no way to increase the trap cap through the player's ability in the game, so it's always static, and by taking up fewer trap spaces blocking things off, ultimately you're able to place more offensive traps, which allow you to ultimately deal more damage over time, so on and so forth. So the regular Barricade for me functions as sort of a dummy barricade that I use in certain situations. On a few specific stages, I might reconfigure it for use as my default barricade. The Temple Grounds, or Temple Graveyard, I'm sorry, is probably one of those maps. It's relatively short, and there's a lot of things that you can do with the regular Barricade that are sort of problematic with the Great Wall. So it's really good there. But for the most part, if I happen to use it in tandem, I set it up with some different parts so that it actually gives different utility. For instance, I have a hero rune frame on it. Normally, I would almost universally recommend double struts if it's your primary barricade. If it's the barricade that you're going to be using to actually hold off enemies, put double struts on it, like hands down. Double struts is going to make it so that it takes almost twice as many hits to actually destroy the barricade. Keep in mind, double struts stacks with the health bonuses from Wall Building PhD, and essentially it makes your barricades nigh indestructible on anything other than endless, especially once they reach max level. The additional damage resistance on top of the additional HP, on top of them regenerating HP constantly, is a huge and significant bonus that in no way can be overvalued. It saves you coin, it saves you time, it saves you a lot of headspace just not having to think about whether or not your barricades are gone whenever something may show up and blow things up, and that just makes it easier for you. Now, you can get through a lot of maps without it because there are some maps that require so few barricades, or barricades in so few places, that aren't really dangerous, or I should say that where the barricades aren't really threatened, that you don't have to worry about it. Like the method that I use for the restricted sections pretty much doesn't put the barricades in danger at any time. So there you really don't have to worry about it, and then it's just whatever. But yeah, any time you are not using it as your primary enemy routing barricade, you can use a hero rune frame, drop it down around places where you'll be fighting if you have the ground space, and it will add some additional toughness to your heroes. Hero rune frames are going to be more important for things like, or for heroes that are melee oriented, just because they have to be at the forefront of the action, and you want them to take less damage. Then I usually use subsidized parts in these, mainly because if I'm taking them, I'm not using them as my primary barricade, and this will make them cheaper and give me a bit of extra coin to start with. Now, if it is going to be your primary barricade, please use stamped parts if you happen to get your hands on them, because of the simple fact that you have to place more barricades to cover areas than you do the Great Wall barricade. You'll have to place more of these, and stamped parts is going to be a super important choice for barricades in general because you want them to be as inexpensive as possible. They don't offer much advantage to you other than routing enemies to specific places, and you don't want to dump a lot of your coin in things that aren't going to do damage. That is one of the biggest things that you'll find will make the game harder, just placing your coin in traps that aren't actually killing minions for you. And it's one of the hardest things to actually get across when learning the game. Like, you need to place traps in a way early on that are killing enemies to generate more coin for you, and then as the game goes on, you can sort of focus enemies into a specific location, and that's when your kill box really gets going. But the first few waves of almost any map is essentially establishing the kill box rather than actually letting it work. So stamped parts and subsidized parts are definitely the choices here. I would not recommend rental parts in this barricade unless you have some very specific strategies for it, but due to the fact that regular barricades don't really have too many like really crazy strats for them right now, I wouldn't recommend it. It used to be that they were amazing because you could change the routing of enemies mid-wave, but that was because they used to be timed on seconds rather than wave count. But obviously, because that was cheesy, it was changed to the wave count, and that sort of ruined everything. But vanity plating doesn't really do much in these. At least in my personal opinion, I found that vanity plating only seems to trigger on traps that actively do something to minions, either that be damage or adding a status effect. So I would not recommend placing a vanity plating in these at all. But yeah, subsidized parts, stamped parts, definitely the way to go. Either one of them is a good choice. Stamped parts the better if you're going to be placing a lot of them. If you're bringing it as a auxiliary trap, subsidized parts is going to be the way to go because of the additional coin. Ultimately, the difference is if you're going to place more than 5 of these barricades, stamped parts is the better choice, because at that point they break even and one more, and stamped parts is the better. However, subsidized parts, that ability to get the 500 extra starting coin and the fact that you can do it across multiple traps should never ever be underestimated. It's amazing. Next up, we're talking about rune slots now. So ultimately, the best rune for me has always been the revenge rune, mainly because the enemies that cause you the most problem when destroying barricades tend to be fire ogres and bosses. Very few other enemies are actually problematic, and the reflective armor really doesn't help with that. The only time the reflective armor is really useful is if you tend to fight around barricades in a way that causes the barricades to get damaged. The enemies around it will take damage as it does, but still not too amazing. Reusable shielding is pretty much just a way to cover the economy loss of losing a barricade, and it's not something that I really like to harp on a lot. There are better uses for reusable shielding, and I'll talk about those when I get to other trap parts. But yeah, this I've never really used in barricades much, although if you happen to have it and you don't have anything better to use there, then feel free to. But yeah, I tend to just stray away from it. So the revenge rune, mainly because you know, having a large chunk of health taken off a boss or a fire ogre is always useful. You can also get it to be done with the bouncer bear if he happens to bug out over top of any particular patch of barricades. So yeah, that's pretty much what I just leave in there almost 100% of the time. But that is going to be it for just what I like to leave in my barricade. That's pretty much what I have in here all the time. And Only rarely do I ever even switch out the hero rune frame. So anytime I place it, that's probably what you'll expect to see on it. But yeah, let me know what you guys think of this. If you think there's any neat uses for any of the other parts, feel free to let me know. But I think that's pretty much it as far as what's in the game right now. And if there's any parts or traps with parts that you'd like me to talk about, feel free to drop those in the description beneath this video, and we can talk about those in another preferred parts. But I'm going to be moving on to another one in a little bit, and then you guys can tell me what you think about that. But thanks as always for tuning in. I'm going to start working on another one of these shortly, and you guys will hear about it then. Either way, until next time, as always, have a good one, folks.